This is James O'Brien with LBC's election call in the run-up to the general election on June the 8th. Prominent politicians from all the main parties will be answering your questions on the issues that matter to you. And right now, let me introduce you to today's guest, Sadiq Khan, who is speaking. No prizes for this, for the Labour Party. The number you need to ask him anything you want about the general election, not about his mayoral remit, is 0345 60 60973. You can text 84850 or you can, of course, tweet at LBC. And, of course, Sadiq Khan will be back shortly to answer questions about his mayoralty. It's just that today we want to focus upon the general election. I have to begin by asking you, Sadiq Khan, Labour Mayor of London, do you know where Jeremy Corbyn is this morning?
Good morning, James. Well, no, I've been on the tube coming to LBC, but I've just heard about this. Got no idea. He's probably knocking on doors speaking to voters.
He was supposed to be unveiling the party's main poster for the election campaign, and he's no one knows where he is. It's not a good look.
I know as much as you do. I mean, I've literally just come here to answer questions from your listeners and haven't been in touch with
I'm allowed to ask
Jeremy.
the odd one myself.
No, I'm just saying, I've not been in touch with Jeremy or his team, so I can't tell you of his whereabouts or the whereabouts of any other prominent politicians.
To the phones. Tony is in Woodford. Tony, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Khan.
Hi, Tony.
How can Labour be trusted with anything? Because, someone within in your party has leaked your manifesto plans. The party seems more intent of infighting and destroying Jeremy Corbyn than representing his voters. So, tell me, how can I trust Labour?
Well, look, Tony, thanks for your question. I'm not sure about the leaked manifesto, if it was a manifesto, if it's a draft, what version it is, who leaked it, and all the rest of it. What I can tell you is the choice you and listeners face on June the 8th. And this is the choice. The choice is a Tory Prime Minister with an even bigger majority who wants a Tory extreme hard Brexit with the EU, which will have an impact on jobs, growth and prosperity. A Tory government that will make further cuts to London's police service, to London's NHS and to London's schools, will continue to stick its head in the sands while the air in London kills Londoners and makes children sick and have underdeveloped lungs. Or a Labour government that will negotiate a good deal with the EU, access to the single market, cast iron guarantee to fellow Londoners who are EU citizens, invest in the police, in our schools, in the NHS, but also help me tackle air quality. And that's the choice, Tony. That's why I'm working my socks off day in, day out, knocking on doors, going street to street, community to community to persuade people to lend us their vote on June the 8th.
You're slightly ducking his question. Let's imagine that everybody listening is utterly persuaded by the glorious dawn that you've just described. What Tony actually asked is how can Labour be trusted to deliver it, given that they can't control the release of their own manifesto?
Well, no, look, James, this is not the first leak, and I'm not sure what the to's and fro's were in relation to this document. It's not the first leak that's happened in the history of politics. There have been other leaks before, and Tony, you and I both know of leaks in government. Nobody suggests the government should fall or a Prime Minister should resign and is not fit for office if there's a leak in the government, just like political parties have leaks all the time. So let's put this in the context of a draft of the manifesto apparently being leaked to a newspaper. But the bigger question is, who is best equipped to lead our country going forward, bearing in mind the big challenges we face? And I'll tell you this, Theresa May is not giving any detailed policy, except we know one. She wants to give MPs another vote on whether fox hunting should be brought back. I mean, that's the priorities they've got, Tony.
Where do you stand on fox hunting?
I'm against it. Look, I mean, in some of the videos I've seen, I think it is a cruel and barbaric pastime.
Who would have had this document? It's 43 pages. Have you seen it?
No, but
why not? Why not? You're arguably the most powerful Labour politician in the country, and you haven't seen the 43-page manifesto. The Daily Telegraph, the BBC, the Mirror, the Sun, the Mail, the Express. Everybody else has.
Well, I don't accept the premise of your question. It's a manifesto. Okay. What I think, what happens though, is the process, and I've been involved in previous processes. Before the manifesto can be signed off, it goes through a process whereby there's a Clause 5 meeting which involves people on the policy forum, they're politicians, there are members, they're councillors, they're trade unions and others, part of the Labour family, who sign the document off. There could be tweaks, changes made. And so what I suspect has happened, Tony, is this is an early draft of the manifesto that somebody had may have been lower down the food chain and has leaked this. And don't be surprised, Tony, if the final version we get, the actual manifesto, is different from this alleged draft.
That meeting is later today. Would you potentially, though, see it, as Tony alluded to, as an act of sabotage on Jeremy Corbyn?
I've got no idea who, inverted commas, leaked this document.
8 minutes after 10 is the time. Tony, many thanks. Margaret is
Tony.
in Nottingham. Margaret, what would you like to ask Sadiq Khan?
Oh, I've just heard him say he doesn't know anything about the manifesto.
So you can tell we're live, Margaret.
Well, I did know, but I didn't need the manifesto to know, because having listened to Jeremy Corbyn over the past year when he said he would like to join the picket line and the rail strike and that he would like to nationalise the rails, then I had a pretty good idea of what he was doing. I have heard a bit on the...
Can I just nudge you gently towards a question, Margaret? Ask him anything you want.
OK, well, from what I've seen, there is no free movement, nothing about free movement on this manifesto. And the other question is that he can't nationalise anything while he's in the EU. So does that mean that he really wants out of the EU so that he can do his nationalisation stuff?
I'm going to try and pick these one at a time. Let's start with what the Labour Party's official immigration policy is. Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, which is linked with the EU. The question that Margaret asks is, Margaret, the British public voted last June to leave the European Union, so we are leaving the European Union. The issue is the terms upon which we leave the European Union. Now, you're right to reference free movement of people, which is one of the pillars of the European Union. Because we're leaving the European Union, it means that free movement doesn't apply. And the question James asked about our policy and immigration, my response is very simple. One of the reasons why London, and I know you're in Nottingham, Margaret, but I'll give you the example of London, why London is the greatest city in the world is our ability to attract talent. You speak to any chief executive, innovator, investor, our ability to attract talent is really important. And we need to continue to attract talent at the same time as skilling up our youngsters to have the jobs of tomorrow. So it's important we recognise the contribution talent makes to our country.
Can I ask you to outline what the immigration policy is for the party? We know that Theresa May has returned to the pledge of tens of thousands, so below 100,000 per annum.
I think
UKIP, a one in, one out.
Having immigration to the tens of thousands would be bad news for London and our economy. Let me give you one example why, James. Just the construction sector, so I'm not even talking about finance and all the other sectors there are, the NHS, social care, creative industries. Just the construction sector in London, 300,000 people work in that, right? 50% of those are UK born. Of that 50%, between 10 and 20 will retire in the next 5 years. Even if I go as fast as I can to train up youngsters in London to have the skills for the construction sector, if immigration is reduced to the tens of thousands, we won't have enough workers to build the homes we need in London. That's just construction. Think about finance, think about creative industries, think about the NHS, think about social care, think about teaching. So this tens of thousands figure that Theresa May talks about, one, is unachievable. They've not met it in the last 7 years. Secondly, it would be extremely damaging to our country's economy.
Margaret, are you happy with that answer?
No.
Go on. Have another pop.
I want to know how he thinks it might be sustainable, because apart from the government's fudge figures, the number in last year was 330 net migration. The insurance numbers issued was much, much higher than that, bringing it nearly to 400,000. So 400,000 a year over the next 3 years is 1 million people every 3 years.
This is a question that will come up again and again in the campaign. The questions of infrastructure, the questions of over-subscription, over subscribe public services. Can you put Margaret's mind at rest?
Well, Margaret, the reason why London is different from other parts of the country is that London chose to remain in the European Union. So we need immigration and we want it. I accept, though, Margaret, some parts of the country don't want immigration, even though they may need it. I also accept that often public services can be impacted if the pace of immigration is too fast. Think about the pace of immigration in some parts of the country in relation to schools. So what I say in response is two things. One is the government should have a flexible immigration policy to give those of us in the country who need immigration and want it the ability to have so. But secondly, we've got to address the issues that leads to people being concerned about the impact of immigration. So, for example, I would argue we should be building more genuinely affordable homes. I would argue we should invest more in the National Health Service so we can address the needs that people have got. The reason why your children can't get a place in decent schools locally, why you're having to wait longer to receive decent NHS care, is because of our failure as politicians to invest in the NHS and to build sufficiently affordable homes. Not the fault of immigrants.
Let's head south from Nottingham down to Brighton in East Sussex, where Kai has called from. Kai, what's your question for Sadiq Khan?
Hello there.
Hi, Kai.
I was hoping to ask about the Lib Dems' proposal of 50,000 refugees. I'd like to know Sadiq's own opinion on that and what do you reckon Labour will be doing with that. As with the attacks in Sweden, the attacks in France, and the rapes of Cologne last year on New Year's, and the rapes in Sunderland about last year of a girl called Chelsea, how do you think 50,000 refugees is for the well-being of the British people, Sadiq Khan?
Well, Kai, I don't think a number works when it comes to asylum seekers and refugees, because the numbers of asylum seekers and refugees that we accept...
So just forgive me, to clarify, Kai, the crimes you refer to in this country...
I'm referring to Nice, I'm referring to...
Just are we clear that they were committed by refugees, these crimes, in Britain?
Ireland,
OK.
In Sweden, an 11-year-old girl was mowed down by a truck by a refugee from Uzbekistan.
He'd already had his asylum application rejected, but we're talking about Syrian refugees, not Uzbeks.
I do, but refugees in general.
OK, so just general refugees, how can we be confident they're not all going to try to kill us, Sadiq Khan?
Well, Kai, you raise a number of issues there, and I'll try and deal with them briefly, bearing in mind the time. Firstly, look, the contribution made by asylum seekers and refugees to our country has been enormous, from Marks and Spencer's to a number of other issues, the wealth creation and all the rest of it, culturally, socially, economically. So I don't accept the premise of your question, which is all asylum seekers and refugees are bad or criminals. Secondly, the way it works with the international conventions around asylum seekers and refugees based upon the United Nations is we accept people fleeing persecution in fear of their life. They are seeking asylum, and if they are able to persuade us they're genuinely asylum seekers, they then qualify and become refugees, which brings them certain rights. Now, the process of how we do that is very important. We obviously don't want people who are coming here and they aren't genuine asylum seekers and refugees. But secondly, how many people we take on is contingent on what's happening around the world. And so obviously it ebbs and flows. And so an arbitrary figure of 50,000 doesn't, to me, reflect the different needs there could be. So in some years we may accept fewer, in other years more. What I do say, though, is I'm very unhappy with the fact we only accepted a small number of children, asylum seekers and refugees from Syria, which wasn't the promise that David Cameron previously made. And we should be accepting far more children, asylum seekers from Syria, than we currently have.
Kai, would you be more comfortable if it was just children that were coming in, or would they...
That's the point I'd like to emphasise. We've tried to let children in, and then the children have beards. I'm only 17 years myself, a young lad, to be honest, and I see these kids...
Can you not grow a beard?
They look about 30. They could be my father.
Can you not grow a beard, Kai?
Work. I've had people who I know who have worked at the Home Office, and they say people are just scribbling on signatures and letting open the gates.
So no to the children then. No to the children in case some grown-ups sneak in.
Sneak in.
Well, that's what you're describing, isn't it? So thank you for being so clear. Jack's in Birmingham. Jack, what would you like to say?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi, Jack.
Sadiq, I'm a first-time voter. I'm 18 years old.
Oh, very exciting.
Is it exciting, Jack, actually?
What, sorry?
Is it exciting to be voting for the first time?
Well, I voted in the council elections the other week, but the general election for the first time, yes, very exciting to see the campaign from this perspective. Unfortunately, I don't see the main parties appealing to young voters particularly. I know that this election's only happening because of Brexit, and without that we wouldn't be here. But Sadiq, why should I vote Labour at this general election instead of the Conservatives? I mean, they've got a clear policy on immigration. It might not be one that I agree with, but they've got a clear policy.
Well, look, Jack, what I'd advise you to do in non-patronising ways is email or phone the candidate standing in your local area and try and get to meet them and ask them questions, because your vote and on the ballot paper you vote on is the candidates in your constituency. And so you do some research, find out who the candidates are, and email them or phone them and meet with them and ask them the questions that matter to you. So if, for example, you're thinking about going to university, ask them their policies around universities and tuition fees. If, for example, you're thinking about working or apprenticeship, ask them what they believe in relation to investing in young people and apprenticeships and jobs. And in relation to immigration, for example, you will be aware one of the reasons why we can attract the best companies in the world to our country, whether it's West Midlands, whether it's London, is because they like the fact that we've got the most talented people in the world here. Not just those who are born and raised in London or Birmingham, but also people who come here from other parts of the world and contribute enormously. And so you may say the Conservatives have a clear policy on immigration, but it's a ridiculous one. They've not kept that promise in the last 7 years of tens of thousands of people coming here, number one. So it's a promise they can't keep. Secondly, if they did, all the entrepreneurs, innovators, investors and chief executives say it would be bad news for our country's economy. And the last thing you want as somebody who may well be going into work or going to university is an economy that's struggling. So do your research, Jack, but I'm really, really pleased that you are going to vote, and you voted already in the elections in May.
What would you say to a Labour supporter who still holds out hope that Brexit can be reversed? Because presumably the only home they've got is the Liberal Democrats.
Well, firstly, I can understand why you'd wish that to happen. But I'm a firm believer in having rules and then abiding by the rules. When I was a lawyer, playing sports, or a politician, and I didn't agree with David Cameron's initial idea to give a referendum, but he gave one, and the British public have spoken. I don't think you can have a best of three. And so the British public have voted to leave the European Union, but, and here's the key issue, it's the terms of negotiation with the EU that's important. So, for example, I believe we should have access to the single market, privilege access. I want to be part of the customs union. I want to give a cast-iron guarantee to those fellow Londoners and fellow Brits who are EU citizens. So how we negotiate those terms are important. Compare and contrast Theresa May, who thinks no deal would be acceptable, and who's not even talking about an interim deal, so we'll fall off the cliff edge in 2 years' time. And let's be frank, she's motivated by pleasing her backbenchers rather than what's in the best interests of the country.
Just to clarify, a tweet has come in from Lane in response to that claim about bearded refugees. He wants us to know that he had a beard at 15 and as a result his nickname was Ewok. We all have our crosses to bear. It's 20 minutes after 10. Staying with Brexit, I think Meenakshi is in Ilford. Meenakshi, what would you like to ask Sadiq Khan?
Hi, yeah, I'd like to ask,
Morning.
do you think... hello?
Hi, morning.
Morning. Do you think Labour voters conflated Brexit with local issues in the council elections, and that's why Labour did so badly? Because I voted Brexit, and my family came as immigrants to this country over 50 years ago. So I suffered racism, and I know racism's totally wrong. And I think some people who voted Brexit might be racist, but I think the vast majority are not. And they're concerned about what it's doing to their local area.
Just give me the question in a sentence, if you can, Meenakshi. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's that, Brexit is an issue for a lot of poor people, a lot of ethnic minorities. For instance, in Redbridge, where I live, between 2004 and 2014, the population increased by 46% through international migration. And Redbridge, it's a really divided borough. So we got, lots of awards.
I'm going to insist on a question. Sorry, Meenakshi. Just ask Sadiq Khan a question.
Well, it's that, are you addressing the concerns of the poor, of the ethnic minorities in the most deprived boroughs? Because it's not the migrants, it's the authorities that have not addressed the issue.
No, I think I got the question, James.
Okay. Carry on.
Well, just two big questions you asked. Which one is the increase in population of Redbridge. Two is the reasons why people voted Brexit. Actually, the reason why Redbridge's population is increasing, it's not because of immigration. It's because families priced out of inner London, or because of the government's welfare benefits changes. So you're seeing in Redbridge people who used to live in Tower Hamlets and Camden moving out because of government policy, and also some people who can afford to buy a house and want a garden. So it's not actually factually correct. It's because of immigration. If you like, it's intra-London migration, inner to outer. That's really important, just to emphasise. It's not the immigrants' fault. People want to live in Redbridge. By the way, you've had a great Labour council since 2014, which helps as well.
We've got to be a little bit careful on this. I'll probably have to invite half of Redbridge's Conservatives onto the programme to balance that out.
Sure. And as far as your question, why poor people voted Brexit, I think you're right. Listen, people who voted Brexit aren't racist, and we just, and I say that loudly and clearly as a proud Remainer, not a Ramona, but a Remainer. But the reasons why people voted Brexit are very complex, and in my view, one of the explanations is Brexit, the referendum, was a proxy for other concerns people had. And so if you're concerned you can't get housing for your son, daughters, nephew, nieces, if you're concerned you can't get mum, dad seen by a doctor swiftly, if you're concerned you can't get a job you feel that you deserve, you blame, not you personally, but people thought the EU was responsible. And some of this was because of, successive governments, successive politicians like myself, not addressing your fears, but playing on them. Others was because, the EU is flabby, the EU is inefficient, the EU does waste lots of money, and we've not reformed the EU in previous years. Now we voted to leave the EU. I think the key thing is not to make pie-in-the-sky promises about a second referendum, about reversing
why would that
decision.
be pie in the sky, though?
Because the possibility of the Lib Dems winning the next general election is probably nil. So they're not going to win the next general election, and we've seen what happens when they form a coalition.
And it wouldn't be pie in the sky for Labour to do it then.
And we see what happens when Lib Dems do form a coalition. They're just the patsy of the Tories. So that's not going to happen. Let's just move that off the table. Don't waste your vote voting Lib Dem with as a Labour candidate. So the second issue is, why can't the Labour government promise a second referendum? Well, because you're saying to voters, you're not very bright. You got it wrong last June. You don't know what you're talking about when you vote. And I think that's patronising and wrong, because I accept the criticism. Those on the Remain side didn't articulate fully the reasons why we should remain in the European Union. I don't accept that voters were thick or stupid, and so I don't think you should have a best of three. The referendum was called. I worked my socks off to try and persuade people to vote to Remain. I'm disappointed in other parts of the country they didn't. I'm proud in London we did. And that's why I say to the government, as far as London is concerned, not only is it crucial because we're the engine of the country, but because we voted to Remain, we should be treated a bit differently in relation to our needs when it comes to immigration and other issues too.
Are you optimistic you're going to be able to pull that off, that London's going to get some sort of special dispensation on national policy issues?
I think the government recognises the huge contribution we make. A quarter of taxes, a quarter of the wealth of the country, a third of the growth. We help other parts of the country do well, just like they help us do well. And if the government wants us to continue to be the engine, they've got to recognise what our needs are.
Alex is in Leon C. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, Alex.
Hello, good morning. What is Labour's stance on defence spending, and why has the party been so weak on challenging the Conservatives on the massive capability gaps that they have created?
On defence or other issues?
On defence.
Well, on defence, I mean, our policy was to have a strategic review of defence spending, and it's really important. I'm a multilateralist. I think we should work closely with our allies, whether it's NATO or allies in the UN Security Council. We've got to invest in defence. I don't believe, for example, that we should unilaterally disarm. I think we should renew Trident, and you'll see the manifesto when it's published, setting out our views on defence. As far as defence is concerned, I'd also remind you, Alex, that part of our defence, by the way, is invested in the police service and counter-terror. You saw what happened in London on the 22nd of March. So when the government is cutting, as they do on an annual basis, the money the Met Police receives, it makes us less safe, which has an impact on defence. And I'd want to see a Labour manifesto committing to more police officers, which helps keeps us safe and is part of our defence.
You happy with that, Alex?
I would have liked to hear Labour committing to spend more on actual defence, like, they're not really challenging the fact that HMS Ocean's been withdrawn without replacement. We were going to get 13 Type 26 frigates. We're now only getting...
Are you a naval man, Alex?
It's something I have an interest in.
Well, Alex, that's why I say we should have a strategic defence review, because you're right. There are serious questions about whether the government's met the needs we have as a country, and you've given two examples. And that's why you have the review. Look, I'm not an expert. You have the review done by experts that then advises you what we need as a country, bearing in mind the challenges we face, in the 21st century. What are the threats to our country? Is it the lone terrorist? Is it the lone person overseas causing acts which threaten our security? Is it armies? And so we've got to have the review, and that then determines whether we have sufficient resources to meet the needs as a country to keep us safe.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn is going to be a good Prime Minister?
Yeah, better than Theresa May.
What adjective wouldn't you use? Can I say brilliant? Would you go on a doorstep and tell people Jeremy Corbyn will be a brilliant Prime Minister?
On the general election of June the 8th, it's not a referendum on who's the most perfect candidate. It's a choice between two candidates in relation to who'll be the best Prime Minister, or when it comes to a parliamentary seat, who'll be the best member of Parliament. And I just think when I look at some of the things that Theresa May has done as Prime Minister over the last 9-10 months, a year on, we still don't know any more about her strategy for Brexit. All we know is Brexit means Brexit, whatever that means, and she'll do...
Talk about Jeremy Corbyn.
No, it's a point. But whereas Jeremy Corbyn is set out, we want to have access to single market. We want to give a cast-iron guarantee to...
So you're going to look people in the eye on the doorstep and say, Jeremy Corbyn, who you have expressed a degree of dissatisfaction about his becoming leader and his performance since, Jeremy Corbyn is the best chance this country has.
Oh, if it's a choice between Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, he wins all day long.
What if it was a choice between Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband?
Well, that's not the choice the voters have got.
I'm just interested in what you think.
The choice the voters have got is between Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister or Theresa May as Prime Minister, and I think Jeremy Corbyn would be far superior. I'm
going to tell you something now, and it's true, so you can't say I didn't know this, I haven't got a response, OK? London Labour MPs are putting pictures of you on their election leaflets and no pictures of Jeremy Corbyn. Why?
Oh, look, there are loads and loads of leaflets flying around.
No,
across,
we haven't
London.
found any with pictures of Jeremy Corbyn, and I've got one in front of me now. Rosina Allen Khan, MP for Tooting, as you know. A picture of you, no picture of anyone else.
Well, look,
candidate for Tooting.
Sure. And a great candidate. Much better MP than the last guy. As the Mayor of London, I know...
Why hasn't she not got a picture of Corbyn there if he's the real deal?
Because as the Mayor of London, I know London Labour MPs probably better than Jeremy does. Jeremy's the national leader.
He's a London Labour MP himself,
no, sure, but
you're not.
No, but he's working around the country in Scotland and Wales, the north, the north, the northeast, the
north. You
north
said yourself the choices between Corbyn and May, so why isn't there a picture of Corbyn on London Labour MPs' leaflets?
Because the Labour MPs you're referring to probably know me better than they know Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, Theresa May's name is in 6-foot high letters and Conservatives is tiny, so it seems a little odd that the Labour leader should be excised from leaflets from candidates seeking to be elected to Parliament.
Well, no, I mean, I'm very proud of my good relationship with London MPs, Labour MPs in particular, and I'm obviously...
So you're in a tough position, because part of you must quite like this. I'm getting a lot of text saying, why isn't he the leader? And you'll pretend that that's water off a duck's back and you don't. But there must be a little bit of you that's thinking, why aren't we coming into this election with a more cohesive leadership? Well,
look, there's a very good reason why Theresa May 3 years prematurely called a general election, because she thinks she can win a significant majority, and my worry is if she does, she'll be able to negotiate a Tory extreme hard Brexit, which is why I'm saying to your listeners, if you want to avoid an extreme hard Brexit, June the 8th is your last chance to do that, and the way to do that is by voting Labour.
And would you advise these candidates to put pictures of the Labour Party leader on their election campaigning leaflets to become Labour Party MPs?
The candidates and their campaign managers, know the position best in their seat, not me.
So you would think that was a reading of a position in a seat if someone decided not to put a picture of Jeremy Corbyn on a leaflet?
Look, I know these guys better than Jeremy does, because I'm the London Mayor. They worked very hard to get me elected last May. I, for example, helped Rosina in her by-election. I've known her for years, and many of these people I've known for years and years and years. So I'm not surprised, and it's no slight on Jeremy that they've asked me to be in their leaflet and not Jeremy.
10:31 is the time. I've got time for a little more. Nicola is in Croydon. Nicola, what would you like to ask Sadiq?
Hi, Nicola.
Hi. I wondered why Simon Danchuk was dismissed from the Labour Party, but you're still allowing Keith Vaz to be part of the party?
Well, that's above my pay scale, Nicola. The NEC decides, the National Executive Committee decides who are the Labour candidates and who aren't. I'm not on the National Executive Committee, and I'm not privy to the details about Simon Danchuk versus Keith Vaz.
But what Simon Danchuk has alleged to have done is not illegal, whereas what Keith Vaz has alleged to have done is illegal.
Sure. I simply don't know the details of either of those two cases, Nicola. So I just don't know.
What's the subtext to your question, Nicola? Just out of interest.
I'm just wondering why I should trust Labour as a party, as they seem to be showing favouritism to one part of the party and not another. And Simon Danchuk is extremely popular in his local area, is he not?
Sure, I'm not really sure which parts of the party. I'm not sure which parts of the party you mean to. You refer to, Nicola, if I'm honest. I know Simon and Keith both reasonably well, and I'd call them both friends, and so I just don't know enough about what concerns the NEC
leave
had.
Keith Vaz out of it then for the moment, and tell me whether or not you think it was right to sling Simon Danchuk out of the party.
Well, I think there are a number of people applying to the NEC to be candidates who were successful and some weren't. I mean, I'm not. I don't know the reasons why Simon wasn't. I don't know. I'm not sure if he's still suspended from the party. I've got no idea. Is the position? I don't know. I know he was suspended when the allegations were first made. I'm not sure if his suspension was lifted. Obviously, if the snap election wasn't called, then the investigation could have happened and the suspension could have been resolved. I just don't know enough about the details.
Okay. Can you conceive of circumstances in which Labour lose the general election and Jeremy Corbyn remains leader?
Look, I'm not going to speculate what happens after the general election. What we do know from history.
It's not really speculation. I'm asking you as a very informed and engaged Labour politician what your opinion is on the likelihood of a certain turn of events. What
we do know from history is obviously when leaders lose elections, they tend to resign, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. But I'm working hard, as are
express
all
a
Labour
preference.
candidates.
If Labour lose the election, should Jeremy Corbyn go?
I'm not going to speculate, James.
It's not a speculation. It's a simple question. It's yes or no. It's binary. If you lose the election, should the leader resign?
It is speculation because you're speculating that we might lose the general election. Now, I'm working very hard, as are thousands of activists and campaigners across the country and hundreds of candidates to have a better result than the one you're suggesting.
Would you have enjoyed watching more TV debates between the key candidates? Do you think they play a role in democracy? It's a relatively new arrival at the electoral table. People tend to forget that.
I was disappointed when David Cameron refused to debate Ed Miliband in 2015, and I'm disappointed that Theresa May's refused to debate Jeremy Corbyn in 2017.
And final question, I think, from Dom, who's in Birmingham. Dom, what would you like to ask Sadiq Khan?
Hi, guys. I wanted to ask, I'm a university student and I study environmental science. And I'm incredibly worried about the limited amount of discussion on the environment that there's been in this campaign. One of the main reasons that I voted to remain in the EU is because most of our environmental laws are from the EU. And I just wanted to know what you thought about the limited talk on the environment.
Yeah, Dom, I mean, it's a cracking question. So let me give you an example of how appalling things have been in the last few years. People had to drag the government kicking and screaming through the courts before they published a plan how to address the issue of the killer air in London and the killer air across the country, and their plans are toothless and completely inadequate. But you raise a really important point, which is the European Union has been responsible for some of the improvements in air and the environment across our country, from the rivers and the seas to the air we breathe, the cars, etc. Not perfect, big improvements. Some of the enforcement action we can take is because of the EU. Infraction proceedings is because of the EU. And my worry is when we leave the EU, are we going to reduce the standards we have in our country? Who's going to be in charge of enforcement? Who's going to be in charge of the check-in? Who's going to be in charge of making sure we have good standards? And what I'm saying to the government in the discussions I have with them is we should be doing what the EU does and some, rather than leaving the EU provide an excuse to do less. And I'm hoping in the manifesto published next week by the Labour Party, we talk about what our relationship will be with the environment once we've left the European Union. And I worry if the government even now is having to be dragged kicking and screaming and puts forward an inadequate and toothless air quality plan. Imagine what they would do if they won a general election with a big majority. And that's another reason to vote Labour on June the 8th.
Dom, thank you. Sadiq Khan, thank you. That was LBC's election call. All through the campaign, we'll be hearing from senior figures from the main parties. Thanks to Sadiq Khan, who was speaking today for the Labour Party. Earlier this week, you had the opportunity to hear from Nick Clegg for the Lib Dems. Tonight at 7 p.m, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, will join my colleague Nick Ferrari to take your calls on behalf of the Conservative Party. And then coming up is Paul Nuttall with Sheila Fogarty to speak for UKIP. It's time for the news now on LBC. It is 10:36. Here is Simon Conway with the headlines.
Sadiq Khan has told LBC he expects Labour's final election manifesto to be different from a leaked draft copy. The 43-page version suggests the party would renationalise the railways and Royal Mail, as well as force wage caps on businesses. The Conservatives say they'll increase defence spending above inflation for the next 5 years if they return to power. The Liberal Democrats want Britain to